Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, and we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Jordan Wishy. Jordan, welcome to the Jewish View.
Thank you, Rabbi Simon. I'm glad to be here.
Well, you're from the academia, and therefore we want to talk about a very interesting subject which we touch upon on this show many times, and also it's a major issue, which means if we can say it's science versus religion. Well, I don't like the word versus, that's why I'm underscoring it, because I don't think it is versus, it's complementary. And of course, we're Jewish, so we like science and maybe we can say and Judaism. But tell us about science and how it complements, or maybe if you want to say the other way, I say it complements Judaism, but Judaism and science go hand in hand.
Yeah, well, I mean, generally, we see where there arose this idea in the first place that there might ever be a conflict. And it seems that some of the French Enlightenment philosophers who hated religion and hated the Catholic Church, and then evangelicals also attacking the Catholic Church, they wanted to say that they wanted to move forward and that science was being held back by the Catholic Church. And they were able to find grist for their mill in the case of Galileo. Everybody knows about the case of Galileo, Rabbi Simon. Galileo...
He was excommunicated.
Right, but it appears that it really wasn't so much the work itself, but it was, say, the intellectual climate of the times, plus Galileo was sort of a friend of the Pope, and then they fell out of favor with one another, and then Galileo wrote a book about different arguments, and he put the Pope's position in a person that he called Simplicio, which suggests that the Pope was simplistic, and so it seemed like the Pope really had to respond to this. And Galileo was sort of operating in this kind of a general context, whereas Copernicus didn't have any of these problems, was venerated by the Church, and was very much supported by the Church. So
could it be maybe even personal? Sometimes people have conflicts with each other, and it's not even philosophical. The only thing I could say in the United States, the Democrats and Republicans, they say yes, we have to say no. It's not really even sometimes.
I think it was personal. It wasn't maybe specifically that the Pope didn't like Galileo's personality, but it was personal in the sense that Galileo was being disrespectful to the Pope and made the Pope feel bad, maybe sort of caused him some dishonor or disrespect, and felt that he had to respond, especially given the climate of the times with the Protestant Reformation and all that kind of stuff. But the history of science in Europe under the auspices of the Catholic Church has a really good track record. Going back to the very earliest period, the universities, the scientists, all of them were essentially clerics. I mean, there were a few exceptions, but most of them are clerics. They're Franciscans, they're Dominicans, and there are reasons for that, because the Christians were reading the Torah. And the Torah told them that they should try to figure out, how God made the world. And what's different about the East versus the West in terms of philosophies like, say, Buddhism or Taoism, or Confucianism, different Eastern philosophies, is that in the West, we have God as speaking to people, and he's speaking to us using language, right? He's communicating in our language to us. The Bible is written in Hebrew, or the New Testament is written in Greek, and so God is communicating in a language, and that suggests that God has built the whole structure using language, and that there are or some kind of set of symbols or codes, and that we can uncover that, we can discover that. Whereas in the East, things just are as they are. They're not...
More existentialism.
Yeah, but yeah.
It's interesting. Well, of course, we're on the Jewish View, and I'm a rabbi, so I know more about Judaism than Catholicism, of course. But it's true even with Jewish scholars. Many times, Samuel is a Talmud, and 2,000 years ago, he says, I know about the stars and the pathways of heaven like I know the pathways of my street. Like, take a left here or right there. You practically can go blindfolded down your block. He says, I know it perfectly. So again, people, and I think that's I always try to emphasize to Jewish people, to say, well, I'm a scientist. People take secular studies. Again, they're in university. And they say, well, but I don't do Judaism. I says, well, Judaism, and again, that's how I started the show. It's not Judaism versus science. It's very complementary, and many Jewish scholars, and the Lubavitch Rebbe himself went to college and got a degree in engineering. So it's not like if you learn about engineering or medicine or whatever. I mean, there's so many disciplines out there that you're an anti-Jew or you're a bad Jew. On the contrary, like you say, the more you learn about God's world, the more that you will see that the hand of God in the world itself.
Instead of complementary, I actually think it's foundational. So it's not so much that that's wrong, but I think it's incomplete in the sense that, it doesn't just complement one another. But I don't think science would have risen had it not been for the Torah's vision that got picked up by these Christians in, the Latin European world.
That's very interesting. You always bring up interesting things that jog my mind, which I like talking to you about, and I hope our viewers do also, because you had the peoples in the Western Hemisphere. Now, I don't know if everybody, but I know like more the Native Americans, and they were way behind in science. They didn't even have the wheels, some of these. And, why did some cultures, progress in scientific in those times? And why did they're living even in when the English or the Spanish came over, 15th century, 16th century, whatever, that they were just like 2,000 years behind, literally, from what they were. And I never thought of it, why, different people. But you're giving me a good answer now. That would be it, because the Christians, obviously the Europeans, which were Christians, that they, or even the Muslims for that matter, and they were advanced also in their day, very scientific, that they had, they were all held by the Old Testament, like you said, basically, fundamentally, they're looking at Jewish texts, and from there that they expanded on it and progressed.
Well, I would say that monotheism is a core feature of any kind of, scientifically advancing civilization. It seems kind of almost necessary because you're searching for a naturalistic explanation in science. A causes B. Now, not all civilizations developed causal reasoning. The Chinese did not develop a causal reasoning process until they got it from the West. And indeed, what we find is that the Chinese developed a very high level of technology, but it was the Arab Islamists and then the Latin Christians who developed science to the fullest extent. The Chinese had a very, very limited theoretical knowledge base. Monotheism is very good for that because in a pagan system where you have multiple gods, things in the world are not happening because there's an underlying coherent structure, but rather because the gods are just fighting with each other, And in the East, things are just happening because they just are. So because of these two different, tensions within each of these different, other alternative ways of looking at the world, philosophically, science was unlikely to develop to a very significant extent in those systems. Now, it went further in the Latin Christian world than it did in Islam, I think, for one major reasons, because the Muslim world had, a value for labor, like the Jews, and like the Christians picked up, because like you said, it's a monotheistic civilization and they were reading the Old Testament. And the value for labor was really important because it developed the wealth and it developed the technologies. For example, you didn't need science to develop glasses. And you didn't need science necessarily to develop a telescope. You just play with lenses enough and you'll figure it out. So it's the industriousness that comes from valuing labor in Judaism and Christianity and Islam that really promotes the achievement of tools that are going to support science. And so you find that...
you don't see that in the Far East?
You don't see that to the same extent in terms of the theoretical development of science. So there's a lot of tinkering, and so they figure out a lot of cool things, like they have blast furnaces, they develop horse stirrups to ride horses, but none of those require any kind of theoretical understanding. But without science, you cannot make a phone. You need a theoretical understanding of, physics and other different, areas or branches of knowledge to make a phone. So the labor is supporting the development of science. And so what's also really different about Christian civilization relative to, say, Islamic civilization, and makes it more like Jewish civilization, is the emphasis on reason. Turns out the Islamists never really relied on human reason. We're very distrustful of human reason. They preferred to have, and apparently the image of God is very different also in the the Quran. In the Quran, God is presented as very meddling, very immanent, whereas in the Bible, he's presented as creating an orderly structure and leaving us kind of within it to do our thing and to exploit it or to develop it, to complete his world, to become partners with him in this world. And this partnership idea is also really key that you don't see so much in Islamic civilization. So their Sharia comes down in pretty much of a complete form. And their the Quran is also basically complete, whereas both the Old Testament is in part written by people, and then also the New Testament is written by people with statements from who the Christians believe is divine, meaning Jesus. So it's a God and people partnership, and that's a really essential element too.
It's again very interesting because I know the quotes of the Judaism, of course, but it's just one idea that it's interesting. I always say I compare and contrast to what I know about other cultures, is because then it becomes a major, issue. You could just say some nice statement, say, well, that's nice, Rabbi, but if you see, well, everybody else is saying differently, and I'll say one idea because it says that God created the world in 6 days. And each one had 6 days to pair off every day. And the seventh day, what did he create? Rest. Well, we have to do the resting. You don't have to make a flower. You don't have to make a tiger, but you have to rest. So therefore, it's not just very sit back and enjoy my world. It says, hey, I want you to do something. But that's very interesting. You compare that to other cultures, and other cultures, it's more like, I would think it's existential, where you just sit back and whatever happens, happens, instead of God saying, no, hello, the world still has an imperfection in it, and I want you to perfect it, so don't just sit around. I want you to accomplish something. And we always hear it. It's very interesting, very nice. Who's going to argue with it? But, you see that when you see other cultures don't have that attitude. You see how Judaism has more of an aggressive idea of, you see Jewish people in the forefront of science and making new ideas. Sometimes it's not totally like Judaism, like Karl Marx was a Jew in communism, or can argue with Freud also. But, again, that initiative of thinking of a better system, trying at least, trying an experiment. Well, trial and error, meaning you're going to err. Sometimes you're going to fail, but at least you see a creative, fertile mind trying to find new systems. So it's interesting.
Sure, and Buddhism may work very well for particular individuals to help them to refine their characteristics, to achieve inner peace or something like that. That doesn't make it a good system for moving the world along to the next stage. It's a different thing entirely.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting you're saying this.
And what you're mentioning about the labor, I think, we see, where do we see this? We see, for example, that in China, ancient China, historical China, that the intellectual class, would always try to become a bunch of bureaucrats, essentially. They would become, part of the Mandarin official, class, and this was the best way to progress as an individual, as a family. All the, if you attained any level of wealth, you would spend all your money to help your children train, to learn the classics, to enter the Confucian bureaucracy. These individuals, to show they didn't involve themselves in labor, in hard labor, any kind of manual tasks, grew their fingernails out long. And that was what.
You always see those weird pictures.
That's what that's about. It's about proving to the world that I don't labor with my hands. I don't dig in the soil. But that comes with a big cost, because then those people aren't involved in the production process. Where today, somebody gets a PhD in chemistry, that guy might become an academic and work at the university. But most people will get a PhD in chemistry and go work for Dow Chemicals or GE, and they'll be dealing with the theoretical literature still, but they'll also be hands-on, seeing what GE is producing and looking to make improvements, looking to innovate chemicals or other products on the market.
And again, I just connected always with Judaism. That's where my discipline is. And some of the greatest sages, I brought down Shmuel, but many times a sandler, like the same word as it's Aramaic, but sandal.
Sure.
A lot of English comes from Latin, which comes from Arabic. And, that they used to make shoes, and this one was a blacksmith. And, these are the greatest rabbis, in the Talmudic period. what do you have to be like? We say a low labor, blue collar labor. But and again, this is what Judaism always pretends we're bringing. It's holy and spiritual, yes, of course, but bringing it down to earth, bringing it down where you can help other people. It's
Right.
just full of these ideas where just to sit back in your seat and meditate in a cave is not looked upon as favorable in Judaism, where, hey, you're a holy rabbi, go out and help somebody. If you're so great, see what you can do, like you say, to better the world.
It could be that some of the intellectual elite among the non-Jewish nations in ancient times looked at our community in a negative way, for many reasons possibly, but one reason possibly was exactly that our intellectual class was laboring, and that they may have had scorn and contempt and been derisive about specifically that how dare their intellectuals do that? It was against their values. The Romans and the Greeks, they all had no value for labor and thought it wasn't appropriate for a gentleman to be, or a scholar to be involved in labor, in physical labor, manual labor. And so they might have looked...
Can you carry that idea through Western civilization, like a class system, even today? You have the people who made it and the people that are, you say white-collar laborers or blue-collar laborers. You're thinking that kind of Roman Western civilization, even,
Yeah,
today.
I don't really see that it. The way I'm looking at it is that it fell away with the rise of Christian society in medieval times, and then you had monks, who would have been the intellectual, theological elites. Monks were very, very much involved in laborious tasks, in running monasteries. They're maybe the first capitalists. Even there's a lot of evidence that the monks were the first capitalists, that they were rationalizing the production on the monastery in order to maximize profit or revenue, and that it was all kind of like coherently planned and integrated, because they were in terms of they were trying to be self-sustaining and self-funding and not seek outside revenue sources other than from their own productive industry. So I think you see that today generally. It's not everybody, of course, but by and large, people still get PhDs and go out and they do labor, they do work. I can assure you that I work hard with my hands all the time. Even though I have a PhD.
Well, because they can't get a job, they're taxi cab drivers sometimes. No, I see what you're saying. I mean, that is a very. Maybe start with Judaism. Maybe it was carried over into Christianity, not just the holy people.
Well, if you think about it, it's not. It was
class.
The people at the top. Meaning Henry Ford, came up with the idea. It's his innovation to build the Ford Model T according to this assembly line process. Nobody did that before. Germany, even like during the 30s, had dozens or maybe hundreds of different models, and then even then, like every model would be a little bit different, and they appreciated all that diversity. In a sense, it's kind of beautiful, all that diversity, but they couldn't, make cars accessible to the masses like Henry Ford could. And he was a guy with an idea. He was a businessman, an entrepreneur, not a worker, and he had an idea, but he knew the production process. That's the main point. He knew the production process, and he had a mind. He could wrap his mind around the totality of the production process, and then move it to the production stage.
Very interesting, though, because we talk about, like I just would tell our viewers that you have a PhD in political science, and that really goes hand in hand, that Henry Ford was a big anti-Semite.
Yeah.
So maybe you can connect the two, because him was like robotic, everybody be the same. That was his idea, if everybody just works together.
That's very interesting. Yeah, that's a big theme that I try to, get out in chapter 2 of my book, where I argue that one of the challenges of the Tower of Babylon is that they were using bricks, and the bricks are all the same, and they represent, the destruction of diversity. And
tell us a shout out of your new book. This is because I'll tell our viewers that, even before production, we have a sneak preview, something that most people don't see. Tell us about your book a little bit also.
Well, it's about creativity, and so
the name of it now?
The name of it is Start Over Nation, it's the idea that the nation of Israel, not the current state of Israel, but the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, has a certain content base. Cognitive frames and concepts like linear time, like a value for labor, that support both the development of science and capitalism, and also that because it's the first nation state, nestled in between all these different empires, and it has a command to dwell alone, and it will stick to that very strongly, maintaining its kind of cultural or ethnic identity, and that allows for the diversity of many nations in the international system, and the diversity of these many nations promotes creativity, and that's what God likes because He's the creator.
It's interesting because that's what we were talking about a lot of, about that. But I'm just back to the production line. Sometimes that's not so really so.
Right. So Henry Ford, that was a really interesting idea. So the bricks, are all the same, and he's making cars that are all the same. And in a sense, Donald Trump likes to complain about the loss of manufacturing jobs, and he's got a whole crew of people, who support him, who are feeling bad about the loss of these manufacturing jobs. But I would say that most of these manufacturing jobs are kind of making people do things all day that are all the same, and that it really destroys their, creativity. And not for everybody. I'm not making a blanket statement that every person who works in a factory is not creative, but that it doesn't promote creativity. And since working is a major outlet for people to be creative, doing the same thing every day for years and years is not good for creativity. So if we're the people of creativity, the people of diversity, the people of individuality or individuation, of stones, that are all different and created by God, not bricks, created by man and all the same, then maybe Henry Ford would be angry at us for that reason.
Yes, well, again, I like that analogy of the Tower of Babylon, where everybody spoke one language. I mean, again, that's a little radical than compared to any other, I'm sure anybody's secular textbook, because the diversity of different nations. But here it's really everybody spoke one language, and we're on the same page, making bricks of the same type. And the God said, nope, you're not going to do it. This is not what the world I want to have made. So again, people are still, like I say, it's always relevant, the Bible. I mean, it's thousands of years old. On the other hand, that is really a little bit of the Tower of Babel story that pertains today. That's pertinent because, some people still want to say everybody should be the same, everybody should be on the same page. And
right. I think that this is a major challenge still. All totalitarian societies want to do this. And we saw them rise again and again. I mean, we had in Pol Pot in the, in Cambodia back in the 70s. So it's a constant challenge of, tyrants promoting the destruction of diversity, the destruction of individual difference.
Well, again, the Jewish value is just that everybody should be the same and be the best that you can be. If you can say the U.S. Army, but the best that you can be, and then you fit together. You don't have to fight each other. I mean, it's a different philosophy. If we're all the same, we won't fight. But on the other hand, Judaism says, be who you are, and we can get along also and just enjoy each other's differences and different cultures. So I think that's a major issue also. So let me, we only have a few minutes left, Jordan, so we have to sum up a little bit. I mean, I want our viewers, when they see your book come out, should become a bestseller. We can
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Give them a little taste of, it's very interesting concepts of, I mean, we talked on a previous show about the empires in Judaism a little bit. You talked about that now, but we elaborated before. Now science and, Judaism and really in all religions. But that's something very interesting. Go back to the original theme, because I want to emphasize that. Because again, that's one of my bigger issues, and I think it is the bigger issues for Jewish people today. Hey, I'm a college-educated person. I don't, this Judaism is just ancient, and it's, that's why I just say, well, there's things in Judaism that would pertain today and very relevant today. And then again, just they're telling you to be creative. No one's stopping you from, of achieving what you want in science and business. On the contrary, God wants you to use your intellectual powers, your emotional powers, and it's not, again, like I started to show, science versus religion, or even you brought out Judaism's really fundamental basis to think. Where are all these Jewish people, Einstein, we talked about Freud and Marx, all these really revolutionary thinkers. All right, they weren't religious, I know, but on the other hand, a few generations before him, they were imbued with Judaic values, of thinking and achieving
And generally, they were in a creative, Christian culture anyway.
It's very interesting also. So that's what I'm saying. Even the Christian people that they say, oh, the Christian church, subdued and all creative thinking.
Right. There's really not a track record for that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, the universities essentially were started by, priests.
Yeah.
And opposed science in Islam was secular people. The clerics were against science almost, always. Whereas in the Western world, in the Christian world, the scientists were the clerics. So we don't really see that again until the 1600s, and only for a very brief period of time, and it was because the church was under attack from the evangelicals, from the Reformation and then the Counter-Reformation. So the church had to, take certain stands and it was also personal. But for the most part, you don't really find that in the Bible. Where would I get anything in the Bible that is obviously against, the 5 books of Moses? Where would I find anything obviously against science in the 5 books of Moses?
I wanted to bounce something off to you in the last few minutes that we have, because everybody reads the Bible and they know the 10 plagues, and they always translate incorrectly magicians of the Egyptians, that they made these wonders. And I was thinking, I wanted to bounce it off of you. It's a new idea that maybe instead of magicians, maybe you can call them scientists. Because in a certain sense, scientists do, if we'd be 100 years ago and you'd say, well, we have a television set that we're on now. So, well, that's magic. That's, wow, look, someone has a picture across town or across the world, we're seeing something happening in China. So maybe just the development of nature,
I'm not going to speak to the language used in the Torah and how it's been translated into the English, but I would say that magic is totally different than science, because magic begs an exception from the universe, whereas science is trying to discover the structure of the universe and then exploit regular and predictable patterns.
You know what? Maybe you gave me a good answer, because that was why was God so mad about the magicians. He wanted to put them in their place, because they were manipulating nature, but in a wrong sense.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're saying is, Judaism says, no, you manipulate nature, fine, but do it in a holy sense.
That makes exact sense to me.
Yeah, that really fits. So thank you for this. Good.
Yeah,
we
thank
have a
you.
good discussion over here, because I was wondering about that. Manipulating nature. Because I always say that if we'd go back 150 years in a time machine and you tell them what happened, what's life in the 21st century, and just basically here we're on television and you can see your picture from one end of the world to the other, and and everybody can make up their own examples, because everybody has the 1,000 examples just looking around them, handheld computers and et cetera, 1,000 times, et cetera. You say, you're a magic world, they put you in a loony bin probably, but you're in a fantasy world. Whatever that is, science, and is the development of the world. It is God's world. He made it,
right? And
He wants develop it. I gave you the
We're
tools.
Partners with Him.
Figure it out for yourself, not just being like robotic and saying whatever happens.
Right, and it's not perfect as it is. It's to be developed. To increase our human dignity.
Excellent. All right. Thank you we're out of time, but it was very enjoyable and I think an enlightening show about science and religion. We'll say not versus religion anymore, and religion, and find out more. Then they can look soon enough, have your book for sale, and look into these deeper aspects that you're bringing out.
For me too, Rabbi Simon, thank you very much for having me on the show.
Thank you.